This morning what we did was we looked at neglect at a more macro level. We teased out what is neglect. We looked at different ways of assessing neglect, gave some thought to interventions and so forth. And one of the themes that ran through the whole of this morning was the importance of really understanding things from the child's perspective. So this afternoon, what we're going to focus on for the first half of the afternoon is really drilling down and thinking, what does that mean? How do we actually begin to capture the daily lived experience of the child? Why is it so important that we do that? And to help us through that process and begin to answer those questions, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Aideen Naughton, who I am sure is well known to many of you. She has done so much work, not only in terms of neglect, but also promoting child protection practices that focus very much on understanding the importance of attachment and providing children in their early years with a quality parenting and a quality lived experience. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Aideen.
Barely recognise that person. Thank you, Jan. Okay, so I hope you're really going to find this next session very helpful. Just moving on straight away, we are going to move into these case studies, really focusing on the lived experience of the child. Just to remind you, you can read there for yourself, clearly the names have all been changed, both in terms of the practitioners and the children. So I think I'll just go straight ahead and hand over to our first practitioner.
Thank you. My name is Tess Rogers. I'm the health visitor to Aaron and his family. For those of you among us who are unsure as to what health visiting is, I would briefly like to explain. It is a universal service that is delivered by a systematic, neatly rated approach, utilising the framework of assessment concurrently with the 4 principles that underpin the health visiting practice. These are searching for health needs, stimulating an awareness for health needs, influencing policies affecting health, and facilitating health-enhancing activities. Over the past 4 years, I have periodically been involved with the family, as Aaron has an older sister. And when she was born, Mum was very young and required some supported parenting advice. Following the birth of Aaron, Mum appeared more mature and had a good support network around her. I carried out several home visits in the early months and felt reassured things were going well. When Aaron was 9 months old, he did not attend the clinic for his routine developmental review, and when I attempted to contact Mum, several times she was unavailable. Then, approximately 4 months ago, I was made aware of a domestic abuse incident via a DAC call, where police were called out to the family home. At this time, it was reported there have been several changes within the family dynamics, and I was surprised to hear that Mum was now in a new relationship. Following the DAC, I carried out a home visit and managed to gain entry. It was noted at this time that the presentation of both the home and family members appeared unkempt. Since taking up with her new partner, Mum reported that there have been various disagreements between themselves, family members and friends, resulting in Mum's previously robust support structure had now diminished. Home conditions on both the exterior and interior had significantly deteriorated. There were various items of rubbish, animal feces, broken furniture in the front garden, and the panel on the front door was broken, and an attempted repair using a carry bag was evident. Within the home, there were spillages and ground-in food on the floor and seats. There were several unfinished bottles of formula feed scattered around the home, between the hall, kitchen and living room. The kitchen sink was overflowing with used plates, cups and cutlery. There were used nappies around the living room and piles of dirty and unironed clothing on both kitchen and hall floor, which the family dog was quite content to use as its bed. When challenged, Mum explained that her daughter had made the mess that morning in temper, as she had not wanted to leave her and the baby. Additionally, as a result of being up all night, Mum was very tired and was expecting her mother to come and give her a hand with the washing and cleaning later that day. The new partner was present, and during the time he was there, he persistently talked over Mum, declaring that due to his work commitments and the family's reliance on his financial provision to the home, it was solely Mum's responsibility to take care of the children and maintain the home. Over the period of a few months, it was observed that Mum's physical appearance and demeanour was gradually declining, from a previously well-groomed, friendly, bubbly personality to being withdrawn and reserved. Her personal hygiene on occasions also appeared to decline. Numerous arranged and opportunistic visits were conducted to the family home to address the issues around poor or non-engagement with various services that was offered to support the family in meeting their needs. Access to the home and engagement services were sporadic. Home conditions were observed to fluctuate in standard, and maintenance, when good enough, was not sustained. Reasons for missing arranged appointments with a health visitor included various plausible explanations for events that led to minimal contact with Aaron. These comprised of Aaron was having his daytime nap when he was asleep upstairs, he was with the grandparents for the day, or older children of a neighbour had taken Aaron for a walk for Mum to clean the house. On my visit 2 weeks ago, I managed to gain entry into the home. Again, home conditions were chaotic, as described earlier. Aaron was reported to be asleep upstairs, so I asked if I could look in on him to see how he was growing. Yet again, Mum made excuses and would not allow me to see Aaron asleep. However, Mum did reluctantly agree for me to return in a fortnight to carry out a schedule of growth skills assessment known as the SEWSCB to see how he was doing with his development. This assessment is an invaluable tool for professionals who need to establish the developmental levels of children. The individual assessment can be used at any time with children from birth to 5 years, thus enabling professionals to assess them as and when required. It provides a reliable snapshot of a child's developmental level, including highlighting areas of strength and potential delay. On arrival yesterday, Mum did allow me access. Aaron was awake and sitting in his high chair in front of the television. My finding of Aaron's developmental assessment at the age of 15 months are as follows. Posturally, Aaron was able to sit unsupported, but could not get himself into the sitting position from supine. When in the prone position, he attempted to pull himself forward using both arms. However, he showed reluctance to weight bear and when held in the standing position, bounced on his feet. Aaron's motor skills were also of concern. He was able to roll but not yet crawl or pull to stand. Manipulatively, Aaron used a neat pinch of grass to pick up some bits from the carpet. When given the blocks, he could cast them and take them to his mouth, but showed no interest in attempting to build a tower. Visually, this was probably the area he showed most interest in. He enjoyed looking for the hidden toy and smiled when finding it. When he was asked to find the dog in the book, he did attempt to point to it. However, when asked, he was unable to identify his body parts. There were no obvious squints at that time. Hearing and language. Mum reported no concerns with his hearing, and I observed Aaron to turn to sounds from behind him. He also responded to acknowledge when I called his name. Speech and language. Aaron appeared to be down for his chronological age. Mum reported that he could say mama, baba, and dada. However, throughout this visit, I found Aaron to be particularly quiet. His interactive social skills appeared to be quite limited. As one would expect, Aaron initially presented as a quiet and shy. However, as much as I attempted to engage him in play, he showed very little interest. Apart from the little smile I observed when playing hide the toy, he really was a very reserved little boy. When Mum left the room to get a phone, I observed Aaron showed no response and no anxiety, but just sat there quietly. The same response was evident when she returned. In summary of his developmental assessment, Aaron presents as having a mild global delay in most of his skill areas. Also of concern was Aaron's emotional well-being. He appears to be a very quiet, sad baby who demonstrates very little emotion. His presentation was also of concern. Although appropriately addressed for the current weather, his clothes were grubby and stained. Additionally, he had extremely dirty hands and feet. In respect of my assessment of the home, it appeared dirty, with grounding stains in the carpet, piles of clothes, both clean and dirty, scattered around the floor, and ashtrays overflowing. In one of the internal doors, there appeared to be a punch hole, but when I asked what had happened, Mum immediately changed the subject. There were very few toys available for the children, and what were there were not age-appropriate. There was, however, an Xbox and numerous adult games lying around. I was unable to assess where Aaron slept, as Mum refused me the request to see his cot. This in itself concerned me. My dilemma is, I have persistently attempted to engage Mum to accept support. However, she initially says she will allow me access, but then avoids me using several plausible excuses. This, I believe, is disguised compliance, but what should be done in the best interest of Aaron?
Let's hear from Aaron now. Quite a lot to remember and take in. So what I'd just like to do is get us to think about what usually we expect when a child around a year of age. Aaron's 15 months. Well, normally children at this age, certainly they're pulling to stand onto furniture and managing to sidestep, perhaps walk around the furniture. Some children will have taken their first steps by now. We don't consider it abnormal not to be walking until, it's beyond 18 months. We would expect to see sort of steps towards that at this stage. Certainly some children will have their first word. That's often a question when you ask people. They remember around the first birthday, the child had their first word. And they're often beginning to point to things as well, point things out that they've noticed. And they enjoy toys in a way that have a cause and effect. Press a button, light comes on. Press a button, little toy pops up. These are the kind of things that the children like to do. They're getting more interested in how it works at this stage. And with some of the children, certainly between 12 and 15 months, we begin to see them showing that they're beginning to understand what objects are for. So, a little toy brush, they'll go to try and brush their hair. And even something like a bell or a cup, they will show that actually has another function that they could try and drink from it as well. So these are the kind of things that we would begin to see. And at this stage, because we know that the attachment system has really got underway by now, we should be able to recognize a particular attachment style, and that's what the strange situation, which some of you have heard me talk about, is based on, between 12 and 18 months, where you can actually really assess a child's response to a stressful situation and then how they respond in the presence of their primary caregiver. So what have we seen with Aaron? And this is only just a summary, really, of what I've pulled out. You heard quite a lot. But we've been told that at his SEWSCB assessment, he was unable to get into sitting position by himself. He's got no real words. He's got, some babble, I guess, but no real words. And the kind of play he has is to pick a toy up, not really examine it and chuck it away. To casting, we call that in developmental terms, or exploring the toy through his mouth. Now, that's not that unusual, but children by the age of a year to 15 months are predominantly using their hands to explore the toys. They're not using the mouth mainly. That's a more immature way of exploring a toy. He clearly wasn't bothered by the departure of his mum and didn't appear to be bothered by her return either. He remained passive throughout. So that's an unusual and an interesting behaviour. And he didn't seem to be particularly curious or interested in others, which children at this age, while they may be stranger aware, are nevertheless initially curious. These are brain scans, PET scans we call them, and what they do is they show up the degree of activity in a brain. The brain scan, as you look at it on the right, is an adult brain. The one on the left is that of an institutionalized Romanian orphan. So this is kind of showing you extremes. Very helpfully, this slide taken from Time magazine has got 2 circles to show you which bit of the scan you're meant to be looking at, which is the temporal lobes. But red equals, color equals lots of activity, whereas blue or black in this case here, underactivity, lack of lighting up, the brain lighting up. And in the temporal lobes of that institutionalized Romanian orphan, you can see it's almost a dearth of any activity. This is the part of the brain that relates to the limbic system, the hippocampus, and those parts of our brain that are associated with emotional control, memory, and laying down emotional memories. So, and actually gets linked into the speech and language system as well. So almost empty. And if you can just pay attention as well, although there's no helpful circle there, if you look towards the front, there's equal underactivity, I would suggest, in the frontal part of the Romanian institutionalized scan as well, as opposed to the normal scan. I'll come back to that later. Right, now what I want to do on your own, on the tables, what you've heard about, just jot down 1 minute what you think in terms of what was Aaron's feelings when his mother leaves the room and then returns, both in terms of himself and how he views his mother. What does that behaviour tell you? Okay? Right, we move on, in the interest of time, to Janet's story. Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Janet's head teacher. Janet has joined our school and attended with us for the past year. She's previously attended a few schools in the Manchester area, and in those previous schools, the school has said that there's been some concerns about behaviour, and there has been some social services involvement. Since joining with us, Janet has found it difficult to make friends, and often her behaviour on the playground is unacceptable. She often says unkind things to other children who try to be kind with her, and have been involved in fights, all of which she claims unfairly have been started by other children. Janet struggles with her schoolwork and seems disinterested, although she does have the potential to achieve more than she is at the moment. She, however, thrives on praise from adults, particularly at an individual level. Janet's attendance has been poor, it's been sporadic, and she's often late for school. She's often absent at the same time as her siblings. On a few occasions, the Education Welfare Officer has attended the home and doubts the reasons for absence. Janet's appearance is unsatisfactory. She is rarely in school uniform, and although the school has provided numerous amounts of uniform, it's seldom worn. Her clothing usually smells stale and is often dirty. Janet regularly suffers from head lice, and despite many reminders from school to parents and from the school nurse to treat her hair, parents do not do this. Janet's dental care is poor, and many teeth are black and discoloured. On a few occasions, Janet has stolen food from other children's lunch boxes, and when asked why she has done this, she has stated it's because she's hungry and that her mother does not have any money for food. This has had a negative impact on friendships again within school. Janet can be very emotional and will cry regularly. She lies, and even about the children who are kind towards her. Janet has not taken part in any school trips or doesn't attend after-school clubs, despite efforts from the school. Parents tend to keep her away from school on the day of the trips. There has been no attendance at consultation evenings, and parents seldom help with reading or number work. There have been a few occasions when parents have not picked her up from school on time. We've expressed concerns to social services about the hygiene and have addressed these with parents, yet there seems to be lack of engagement and no significant improvement.
Thank you. And let's hear Janet.
I like school. I look forward to going every day. Sometimes I don't sleep very well because my mom and dad are up late or my brothers wake up in the night. The teachers are nice and we do lots of fun things. I get upset sometimes though because my mom and dad won't let me take part in some of the clubs. I started to go to breakfast club now, which is good because the food is really nice and you can eat as much as you want. I get upset when I don't go to school because I miss my friends. Sometimes some children call me smelly and that makes me upset and I cry. It's okay for them because they have nice clothes to wear and they can go on trips. Sometimes I get really angry, so angry that I've punched someone. I didn't mean to, but it's like I don't know how I'm going to be the same as my friends. My mom is really busy, so she doesn't come to see my teachers, and sometimes I feel silly when I haven't done my homework.
Janet's 8 and having problems. So what about children in this middle stage of childhood? What are they like? Well, usually this is a period of having established some friendships, and your self-esteem is increasingly dependent on your peers and on those friendships. It's the time when conscience begins to develop, and children of this age can tell the difference between cheating and winning in games as well. They've got that understanding. They tend to be very increasingly self-motivated and like to conform to the rules, to belong. They're also beginning to recognize different types of emotions and beginning to regulate them themselves, and are motivated to learn. What we're hearing from Janet's teacher and from Janet herself is that things are very different for her. She's not liked by her peers, and she's unkind and blames others for that. She lies. She needs adults' praise. She's actually quite dependent on adults' praise and attention, and she has very volatile emotions. She gives way to these aggressive urges and lashes out even when she doesn't mean to, and is actually confused by that. And she's not achieving her potential academically. So what we know is that children who have experienced abuse and neglect in their life and have developed a traumatic attachment, that they can actually go between two states. They may be very hyper-aroused, and that's that aggression, impulsive behaviour, children who are seen as with emotional and behavioural problems, and they're stuck in that fight or flight, so they swing up and then swing down again into switching off when that's overwhelming. So they dissociate, they may appear depressed, and for some children that may be suited through self-harming. So the question for 1 minute for you now, on your own, is to consider, what does Janet's aggressive behaviour tell you about her self-esteem and how she might be feeling at the time? Okay, now we're going to hear about Shelley and her story, and hear from one of the youth workers.
Hi, I'm Kerry Griffiths, and I'm a youth worker for Monmouthshire Youth Service. Youth work offers support and guidance for young people between the ages of 11 and 25. Monmouthshire Youth Service works with young people across Monmouthshire, supporting them as they change from children to adults, from dependence to independence. It helps young people, particularly those in need, as they learn about life. I'm going to share with you my experience of working with a young person called Shelley. I first met Shelley when she was 11 years old, a very bright and bubbly young person who enjoyed interacting with others and joining in with activities. Shelley used to visit the youth club every night we were open, and even arrived early most days to chat with the youth worker and the team about her day. Shelley began volunteering on a regular basis as part of her Duke of Edinburgh award, and encouraged other members at the youth club to join in. Shelley was instantly liked by anyone who met her, and could always be found in the midst of laughter in the youth club. Shelley was a regular visitor to the tuck shop and used to share what she brought amongst friends. Shelley was always immaculately dressed and took pride in her appearance. I noticed a change in her when she first found out that her dad was poorly, around 6 months ago. She came to tell me that she wouldn't be able to volunteer anymore because she needed to spend more time at home with her family. Shelley's friends often approached me to say that they hadn't seen her and that she was constantly making excuses about coming out and that she had to look after her younger brother. I observed that over a period of 6 months, Shelley's attendance became less and less, both in youth club and their voluntary capacity. When I did see Shelley, her mood was very changeable, getting stressed out very easily, less motivated, quiet and avoidant of conversation. Further things I observed was that Shelley was losing a considerable amount of weight. Her once-fitted clothes began to hang off her shrinking frame. Not only were Shelley's clothes too big, but they were stained and creased. Shelley started to attend youth club without any money for tuck, like she used to, and told other youth workers that she was trying to save. Shelley's attendance gradually decreased and became very sporadic. On various occasions, I attempted to speak to Shelley about how she was, and she would often reply in a closed manner. I began to become concerned and make connections with her teacher, who also had similar observations. I mentioned counselling to Shelley, but she didn't want to take me up on this either. Shelley came in one afternoon before youth club and wanted to talk. I could see from her body language instantly that something was wrong. I took Shelley somewhere quiet and comfortable so that we could speak. She sat down in front of me and wept. As her body started to shake, it really emphasised how frail she had become after losing quite a bit of weight. I observed that she seemed exhausted and unkept, which was unusual for Shelley. I sat with her for a while in silence to give her the space and collect her thoughts. After at least 10 minutes, I told her I was there if or when she needed to talk. A further 10 minutes passed, and Shelley bravely announced that her dad had passed away. It was at that moment that Shelley's phone rang, and she answered it with a clear, upbeat tone, despite tears still filling her eyes. Shelley told me that she had to leave, and that her mum needed help with her brother, Tom. Shelley mentioned that Mum was finding it hard to look after Tom since the passing of her dad, and that she had to step in. I advised her perhaps write down some of her thoughts, and that she could come back to me any time if she needed to talk. I slipped into her hand a face-to-face counselling card and reassured her that we could offer support. Shelley gave me back the card and said she wouldn't have time to see anyone because her mum needed her. My concerns for Shelley are whether or not she is receiving adequate support at home. I wonder if Mum is perhaps becoming too reliant on Shelley because she is also grieving. I am also concerned whether or not I will see Shelley since her visit today after a comment about not having time. And if I don't know, how can I give Shelley adequate support or look out for her well-being if she isn't visiting the club? Also, due to our conversation being cut short, I'm completely unaware if the family are receiving support. I wonder how I can keep within my boundaries as a youth worker, in addition to supporting Shelley effectively.
Thank you. And let's hear from Shelley herself.
I sometimes wish I could go back to this time last year. Everything was normal and we were a family. Now everything is just a mess, and honestly, I don't know where to start with cleaning it up. Things started to change after Dad got diagnosed. He stopped taking us out as much and just deteriorated with time. Although Mum and Dad said there's nothing to worry about, we all knew that he was disappearing in front of our eyes. My friends would try and ask me if I was okay, and I knew they meant good, but I didn't help. They asked questions I didn't have the answers to. Mum began to get very stressed when Dad started his chemotherapy. I think she thought things would dramatically improve, and it did for a while, but then he just went. No goodbyes or family sat around the bed with him when he passed, like we all wanted. Instead, he was alone, and that's what my mum hates the most. I started to lose weight. I lost my appetite after I saw Dad in the hospital. All the wires, drips, that's enough to put anyone off their food. I stopped going out everywhere. I couldn't face school. I guess you could say it was like I was hibernating. I didn't want to face reality because right now my dreams were better. I felt like I couldn't talk to Mum. She shut down, wouldn't talk to anyone. She cried a lot and sent my brother away to stay with my nan for a while. He always asked where Dad had gone, and we replied with, on holiday, and that broke my heart. I decided the only person I could talk to was a youth worker, so a few hours ago I went to see someone at the youth club, before it was open of course, and told them everything. I crumbled. I wasn't very confident anymore. That's when they suggested writing this, and somehow I'm finding something with no ears can listen so faithfully to what I have to say, and never get offended or hurt.
So thinking about a normal 14-year-old, whatever that is. I think I'm meant to have one of them at home. But clearly peers are very important at this age, aren't they? Very, very, very important. It's a time of increasing independence, certainly looking forward, but also increasing choices and feeling empowered to take those choices. It's important to be popular. It's important to belong to groups and not to be on the outside. One's appearance is very important, and getting that just right, depending on the group you wish to belong to, is also very important. And that individual style, jotting up against that kind of tribal group. And privacy is cherished, is particularly so. This is increasingly so through this age group. There's lots going on for Shelley, I'm sure you would agree, having heard her story. But she seems to have changed quite dramatically. She's very withdrawn and sad and closed down, seemingly unaware of her appearance, and clearly absolutely exhausted, underweight, possibly truly malnourished in a medical sense. And this false affect, needing to be bright and cheerful, clearly for her mother, about whom she's got lots of concerns, and bright and cheerful, I presume, also for her younger brother. But at a point when she's very upset and has just opened up, in a way, a floodgate situation, was unable to hold on to it any longer with the youth worker. So in terms of Shelley's history, I think we can think about resilience and resilience in children. Children who fall into these three categories. It's one way of thinking about resilience that Maston et al. Described. So children who don't succumb to adversity in spite of their high-risk status. You'll all have worked with children like that, and you think, how are they able to keep it? But there's something inherent in these children. Children who develop coping strategies in situations of chronic stress, and they just seem to be able to use them in a very positive way to deal with the situation in which they're living. And then you have children who've suffered extreme trauma, who are able to recover and prosper and seem to manage to incorporate that and not quite leave it behind, but actually still manage to go forward. So what do you think the factors are in Shelley's history that might be used to support Shelley at this point and promote her recovery? Right, let's move on and we'll listen to Jack's story and hear first from a practitioner who worked with Jack.
My name is Gareth and I work for the Youth Offending Service as a social worker in the post-court team. The Youth Offending Service is a multi-agency organisation who works and supports young people aged 10 to 18 who've committed offences. The aim of the organisation is to prevent the young people from reoffending. I first met Jack through my work with the Youth Offending Service as I was requested to compile a pre-sentence report for his court appearance. Jack, who was 17, had been charged and appeared in court for the theft of motor vehicles on 7 different occasions. During the time that Jack was committing the offences, he was living in supported accommodation and was being helped to live independently by a key worker. However, after stealing items from the cars, it is reported that Jack made the decision to take the stolen property back to his room at the hostel. This resulted in him losing his tenancy, and he was evicted because he broke the terms of his tenancy, therefore made himself intentionally homeless, which meant housing had no obligation to house him, and subsequently Jack was placed in temporary accommodation. Jack is now living alone in a bed and breakfast with no support at all. His mother and older sister live in a different area of Gwent. Jack has a volatile relationship with his mother, and this resulted in him moving away from the family approximately 6 months ago, when he moved into the supported accommodation. He has a good relationship with his sister, who offers him support, but she has a young family of her own, so the support she is able to offer is limited. He has no cooking facilities at the bed and breakfast, and his only income is a hardship payment, which is a minimal amount once every 2 weeks. The bed and breakfast that he is living in is in a crime hotspot, which means that he's exposed himself to a pro-criminal peer group. Subsequently, this makes him more vulnerable. As a result, his offending behaviour has increased, and he is befriending more sophisticated and entrenched offenders. On the day that I met Jack, I arranged to collect him from his accommodation and bring him to the Youth Offending Service office so that I could interview him for his report. He sat in the front seat of my car, and I started to drive. Jack seemed really quiet during the journey, When I asked if he was okay, he started to cry. At this point, I became really concerned and asked what was wrong. He then told me that he had no money, was starving, and hadn't eaten for days. His money wasn't lasting him at all, and in the past 8 weeks he had lost 3 stone. He went on to say that he was becoming really depressed and didn't know how he could carry on. Well, I could see that because of the distressed state that Jack was in, there was no way that I could be able to interview him until he had calmed down. So I took him for a coffee and bought him some lunch. Once he had calmed down, he told me that he had a cannabis addiction, which was the main reason for his offending in the first place. The idea was to sell the stolen property to fund his habit. After speaking to Jack, my main concerns were the fact that he wasn't eating and appeared malnourished. When he was eating, his diet was very poor, and even though he was having money, he was unable to budget due to his cannabis addiction. I was also faced with the dilemma of dealing with the relationship between Jack and his mother. As he was only 17, his mother still had parental responsibility and a duty of care. However, as the relationship between the two was so volatile, there was very little chance that his mother would take care of him. I contacted Mum and explained the situation Jack found himself in, but Mum was not sympathetic and didn't want anything to do with Jack. Therefore, I had no option but to let him reside at the bed and breakfast. Due to Jack's situation and my concerns, my first task was to make a social services referral, as he was classed as a child in need. I then put a plan together with Jack to involve him in a structured intervention program which would address his problem-solving skills and the consequences of further offending. Jack was clearly unhappy with his living conditions, and through our discussions, it was obvious that Jack wanted support to be able to help himself. So we agreed that I would support Jack in finding suitable accommodation and meaningful career opportunities. I also arranged to assist Jack in accessing and claiming the correct benefits. Jack had heard about the new project recently launched by Llamai called Moving Forward. Llamai are joint working with partner agencies to provide vital support to some of the most vulnerable young people in Wales. The project involves the provision of paid work placement opportunities, mentoring and support to young people leaving care and those who have offended. Because of the discussions with Jack about helping himself, I made the referral. I was still concerned about Jack presenting as low in mood and his cannabis use, which he said he was using to make him feel better about his situation. But I felt it was having the opposite effect, because when he came down from the effects of his mood was lower. So I made the referral to the Youth Offending Service clinical nurse specialist to discuss his feelings.
Thank you. So how does Jack view this?
I left the family home when I was 16. I didn't get on with my mother. She had physically abused me since I was 11. I liked to use cannabis because it made me forget about my situation and made me feel good for a while. It was okay when I lived in supported accommodation, but I was unhappy when they kicked me out. He said I had stolen goods from my room, but I didn't. When I went to live in the B&B, I was feeling depressed because I didn't have any money for food and cannabis. I felt I had no options but to steal from cars. The B&B is a rough place, and I was in with a bad crowd, which made me offend worse because we were all doing it. When Gareth picked me up that time, I was really low, and I didn't know how I was going to carry on. I had lost so much weight, about 3 stone in 2 months. The more depressed I became, the more I wanted cannabis, and it became more important than food. So any money I did have, I spent it on that. I hated being in B&B. I wanted to get a job and somewhere nice to live and look after myself, so I suggested the project to Gareth, who made a referral. If I complete the course on independent living, it will give me more points towards housing because I have shown my commitment. My cannabis use has reduced, and now I realise that it's more important to eat and that the cannabis was not helping my situation. I am happier because of the sport, and I appreciate all the help I get from them.
Well, this is even harder, I think, to describe a usual 17-year-old. Here goes. Clearly, this is real transition into adulthood time, isn't it? And it's natural, it's normal, it's what it's about, risk-taking, but within the limits of support that's available. I think what we often forget is that actually that capacity to really understand the complex consequences and relationship between your behaviour, the risk that you've taken, and the consequences isn't fully developed until you're into your mid-20s. Yet you're driven to experiment and to risk take as a teenager. This is normal behaviour at this stage. But what we do know is that what's crucial for this safe transition into adulthood is to have these factors: a safe, supportive, positive family, safe, supportive, positive school, and safe, supportive, positive peers. But what's happening for Jack is a far cry from that. He's homeless, he's depressed, he's had some suicidal ideas. He is heavily addicted to cannabis and it's affecting his motivation. He himself describes that the peer group that he's been mixing with through the accommodation that he's had are a bad crowd, that they're actually drawing him into further offending. And of course, he's very much disengaged from his family, with whom he's had quite horrific experiences with his mother. And obviously that's not a source of a safe, supportive network or a relationship. And I guess you've heard me talk about the brain before, a number of you, but one of the things I think that's quite interesting and important to remember are not just the structural changes, but what's going on at a hormonal level. And of course, adolescence is all about hormonal shifts and surges, and the impact that that's having on the adolescent brain. So the stress hormones of cortisol, but also oxytocin that we're beginning to understand a lot more about, which when it's present, it seems to be associated with affiliation and development of empathy. If it's low, then there's an impact on those particular features. And of course, this risk-taking and novelty-seeking, which is linked with dopamine. And of course, using a drug that's going to make you feel better for a while leads to its further use, of course, in terms of that reward-seeking behaviour. So let's think about Jack then. So what do you think Jack's behaviour, or Jack's earlier relationship experiences might have been in the light of his recent behaviours, and in particular the theft, the cannabis dependency, and the depression? All right, I'm just going to try and draw some of this together for you, but against an understanding of, I guess, neuroscience and neurobiology and the impact of neglect on these aspects of children. I guess this audience here, understand that maltreatment is bad for children, and we know now, there's lots and lots of research to say it's very bad for brain development, both in terms of structure and in terms of the development of specific areas of the brain. Well, there's more massive time of brain development, but particularly in terms of bringing on stream the frontal lobes and that executive functioning. But while it is a time of massive brain growth, very quickly what's happening is that they become less adaptable, because of course this is the final period, if you like. There's a lot of pruning, there's a lot of refining. So intervention at this point is important, because there's the ability to make some changes here. So while it becomes more efficient, it also becomes less adaptable. I mentioned about the frontal lobes not being fully developed until 25 years. It is normal to be more amygdala-driven, to be more in that fight-flight mode, that kind of overreact. You're always saying that you're just ridiculous, mother. You know, it's typical of you that you would say that, as was said this morning on the way to school. But equally, dopamine is a strong hormone acting as, at this stage for our adolescent children as well. It's necessary. It's about discovery. It's about novelty seeking. It's about being able to find out new things and help that transition into adulthood. But of course, if other things come in at that time, it may get reinforced for other reasons, and it may be sought for other reasons. And of course, as I say, we have a second chance for developmental change. So important opportunity to see is there, some resilience that can be promoted and supported. But we need to understand, and I think this is an area that we're increasingly trying to understand, is that interrelationship between the biological and the psychosocial. There is research that will tell us that when serotonin is low, there's a gender-specific difference. If it's low in boys, you get more aggression, and if it's low in girls, you get depression. So that kind of more internalizing features with girls, externalizing features with boys. But it's not just about the hormones on their own, it's in combination with the family setup. So we know boys who have higher testosterone in association with poor family relationships are much more likely to take risks, to be involved with theft, truancy and lying. Disorganized attachment, that research I referred to earlier on at age 1, is the best predictor of serious psychopathology in adolescence. So knowing about that early history is really, really important. And of course, it's a time of experimentation with alcohol and with other substances. I mean, alcohol is endemic in our adolescents at this age, and it's, has been for many years. So ask the child, what is their view of themselves? Do they feel that they can turn to their parents, because we know that that's an important part of it, for help? What do they think their parents' view is of them? And what is the depth of their friendships? These are all the important supportive things for the children. And I don't know what setting all of you come from, but if you know a child in one setting, say for example, the educational setting, and you've got concerns, it's essential that you explore that with other people who may be involved in the child's life. So we have the youth worker wondering, could she step outside her role to actually talk about this child with other people who might know and know what's going on. And observations of others who may see the child and bring that together. So really what I'm trying to suggest is that we need to think about what we can learn from the child, but also think about other things that are going on as well. Neglect often coexists with other forms of abuse, and we need to think and look out for that.